Hi, welcome to Barb's Book Spot. Hi, welcome to Barb's Book Spot. I have some great books to share with you today related to art, and whether it's music or visual arts or writing, literature, the art of creation and the inspiration that we need to get to the point where we can create it ourselves is something that I think we want to inspire in all of our students and our children. So I'm going to start today with a book called Rainfish. It's by Lois Ehlert, and it's published by Beach Lane Books, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. And this is a 2016 book. It just came out this year. So Lois Ehlert is known for her very creative use of found objects and sort of a mixed media approach to art. And just take a look at this. This is the end papers of the book. I'll show you the last end paper in a minute. But I want you to notice that she's sort of, she's front-loaded the pieces, the feathers, the papers, the pieces of trash towards the edge of the page where we want to turn the page and see what happens next. And you'll notice that throughout the book and throughout many books, illustrators will do that. They put something on that far edge of the page that makes you want to turn the page, gets your eye moving in that direction to see more. So this is sort of an asymmetrical arrangement of trash and junk. And I'm not sure we're seeing any fish in there yet, but look what she does. She'll take those objects and rearrange them. She changes the background a little bit. So instead of against that wet gray cement looking background, we have a bird's eye view, we're looking down in the gutter or the sidewalk at the trash. Now we have a different background, and that black, that dark color, makes the colors of the trash pop. And she's rearranged those things a little more carefully to make us see the fish. Now she tells us in the end papers that we see more than 40 fish throughout this book, and so kids can go back and take a look and see if they can find all the fish and maybe with their mental rearrangement of objects create their own. She talks about the rainfish coming out to play when it rains, so that's a particularly good time to look down and walk around in playgrounds and parking lots and on the sidewalk to find things that maybe have washed around because of the rain. Here's a different background. This one is blue. She says, I want to read the page before, because she says, is it just me? Do you see them too? They love to splash in puddles. And then she goes on to tell us, and dance upon the concrete. And I feel like by characterizing the trash, the fish, she's given them a personality. They dance and splash. They're doing something. They've become active. They've become sort of real in our mind's eye. I just love the way she uses just everything and anything to create her art. Let me flip to the back here for a second. The final end paper, she gives us a listing, an arrangement of all of her junk, all of her trash. And if you look closely, you'll see there are little labels next to the things. So in the first end paper, we had just a random collection of stuff. Here we have a very organized arrangement of stuff. And neither one of those, the first or the last, generally maybe speak to art or artistic arrangement. But once you start putting those things together in a new way, that's when you see the fish. That's where trash becomes art. So I just love this little book by Lois Ehlert. This book is similar concept, very different book. This book is by Anthony Brown, and the illustrations are by Hanny Bartolin. And the name of the book is Frida and the Bear Play the Shape Game. You can tell from the cover that these two, there's a little elephant and a little bear, that Frida and the elephant. What they do is they make a shape, and then the other person has to decide what that looks like and turn it into a picture. The very first page of the book, they're sitting in front of a blank sheet of paper. What do I draw? I don't know what to draw. I don't know where to get my inspiration. Now this book is published by Walker Books, and so some of the words in here, at one point somebody calls the little character that's created cheeky, and so that's a British expression, but it's an imprint of Candlewick, and this is a 2015 book. Let me show you a little bit of what they're doing in here. They start with the drawing shapes and handing back and forth, and eventually the background of what they're drawing on changes. They start on graph paper, then there's some loose leaf paper, then there's a blank sheet of paper. Here we see a piece of a torn envelope, And what we see, it's not spoken, but what we see is this development of, oh, well, maybe I see something in this shape here that gives me an idea. So now, from here on, we have a scrap of cardboard or a stick or a twig, some other found objects that become the basis for the new creation, for the new drawing by the other character. Very simple text. There's one sentence per page. A young person maybe in first or second grade might be able to read this book easily on their own, and then work their way through and look at the creations that they make. So here's a later illustration. In this case, it's a found object is a twig. What does that remind you of? What does that look like? And they decide that it looks like the body of a butterfly. So you can see how the art and the artistic ideas have developed a little bit. So again, very similar to the other, where you take nothing or a little bit of something and turn it into something much more with your artist's eye, with your creative spirit. Now, visual arts is one thing, but we also have to think a little bit about literature, and I thought that's an art too, and that's something that we want to encourage our youngsters to have inspiration and be creative when they write a story or a paper or whatever it is they're doing. So I'd like to share this book, Also an Octopus. It's by Maggie Tokuda Hall, and the illustrations are by Benji Davis. And they say that even the most totally awesome story starts with a little bit of nothing. What happens next is up to you. And this is also published by Candlewick, and it's a 2016 book. So here we start out with children that want to write a story, and they're just not sure where to start. And the narrator speaks right to the reader and says, well, you start with a little bit of nothing. You better start with, how about a character? And so what do you want your character to be? That's the tone of the narrator speaking to the reader. And so you could have a bunny, you could have a little girl. Who are you going to have for your first character? Well, the narrator says, how about an octopus? An octopus who plays the ukulele. Now there's an interesting character. That could be the basis for any good story, an interesting character. But let me read you the text to what goes on. But in order for it to be a story and not just an octopus, that octopus needs to want something, like a sandwich. No onions, please. And then here's figure B, a sandwich. Or a friend. Oh, hello. So we have this character. Now we have to give the character some motivation. They need something. They want something. Something happens to make them respond. So motivation would be the next thing that we're going to see to the development of our story. The book goes on like that, adding piece by piece. We have some events, some troubles that happen. They decide they want to have the octopus go into an intergalactic spaceship, a purple intergalactic spaceship, but then it doesn't work. And by about 2/3 of the way through the book, the octopus is sad and he's depressed and he doesn't know why his story's not working, so he's sitting all alone on the page playing his ukulele, a little bit of music for meditation and inspiration, when some friends start to show up. And in that quiet moment, an idea. I know just what we're going to do. So at the end, there's a spill of ideas, and I won't tell you what the end of that story is, but the very last page encourages students to take the time to think up their own stories, to be creative. And it says, and everyone has a little bit of nothing, right? That's what we start with. It's true, and we see the beginnings of another story sailing off onto the page with some idea. Maybe a child could look at this picture and write the story they think goes along with this. Or they could change that rhinoceros into an elephant or a hippopotamus or something else. So great ideas for beginning a story, for finding inspiration, and you could also use it to go over the elements of storytelling. And my last selection today kind of pulls it all together for me. This book is called Wet Cement, and it's by Chris Rashka. It was published by Macmillan, Roaring Brook, and that's an imprint of Macmillan in 2016. And Rashka writes what they call concrete poetry. He gives a description in the beginning of the book about what he defines concrete poetry as. But I want to show you, look at the title of his introduction. Do you see how the eye has slipped down to become a paintbrush? Okay? Word paintings. That's what he considers it. I like to think of poems as word paintings. A poet uses words like colors to paint pictures inside your head. In concrete poems or shape poems, the words also paint pictures on the page. The poet arranges the words in the shape of the thing the poem is about, or in a way that emphasizes the poem's meaning. So here we have the coming together of literature, creative writing, poetry, and visual art. We're helping visualize what the story or the poem is about. Let me show you some examples. And this one I love. There's so many things going on in this very simple little poem. We have the T from the word take off. So in my mind, that's the plane taking off, right? And it looks a little bit like a plane. I can see that. And the words down here, let me just read to you. Wright, and it's spelled W-R-I-G-H-T. So there's an allusion to the Wright brothers. Right on course, headed for heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right back down, but proud of himself. Okay, Wright is spelled with a W again. So I'm thinking about the Wright brothers' first flight. It was very short. They barely got up and then they came down. But you know what? Yeah, we did it for the first time. I've got a play on the word right. So it's Wright as in Wright brothers as opposed to Wright as R-I-G-H-T. I have the very title of the poem is a little sort of metaphor in and of itself because the T is taking off. All right. And all of these poems have something like that going on. There's just a million little things going on. I love this one. This is very visible. It's hanger, and they hung the hanger. So the title itself is a little image. And then if you read around, there's a play on the word to hang out. Again, you can hang out with your friends, or you can hang out the laundry, or things can hang. So there's a couple of meanings of the word hang being used within the shape of the hanger. Here's one. Now this one I love. First of all, you'll notice that you can't really read the poem because it's sideways. You'd have to turn the book sideways to read it, and I'll do that in a minute. But first, look at the title, Icicles. And look at, the letters aren't quite right. Some are upside down, like the eyes. And I think the eyes were deliberately put upside down so that the little dots for the eyes look like drips off an icicle. So already we're starting the metaphor. We're starting the image in our mind's eye. We see these little drips, and we have the L hanging down instead of sticking up because icicles hang down, okay? When I turn the book to read, of course, these all look like icicles hanging down from the top of the page, but when I turn to look at it, you'll see that some words have the letters spaced way out. I'll read the first 3 lines. When the snow begins to melt and gutters start to drip, D-R-I-P. The word drip is spaced out. Again, that slows me down in the reading. I get the idea of the D-R-I-P of icicles, you know, the dripping, that constant. And you'll see that spacing reoccur throughout the poem. Again, a lot of ways to get to that same visual image and that same idea. Here's one more to look at. Many of the poems are on a white background, but some are on a black background with white text. And the font changes depending on what the topic of the poem is. So here we have lightning. Look at the L and the I in lightning. It makes a little zigzag. And then the whole poem itself is shaped like a bolt of lightning. So I think we always want to look for ways to inspire ourselves, to inspire our students, to think about art. Art is everywhere. Art is part of our lives, and I think art is what helps us rise above the day-to-day, mundane, everydayness of life. So I hope you find inspiration, and happy reading.